Hello everyone, welcome back to video number 2. Today we are looking at analysing language, which is the most important skill that you'll actually do in GCSE English. So why is analysing language so important? Well, because you don't only use it in the question that is specifically about analysing language, which might be, for example, if you're doing AQA, it might be language paper 1, question 2, it might be somewhere else if you're doing a different exam board. You don't only use this skill in that question, you also use this skill in all areas of literature, and you use it in questions when you're evaluating. So that's when you're debating a point of view. That is question 4 in paper 1 for AQA. And you can also use this skill when you are comparing perspectives between two texts. So it's actually used in the majority of areas of English directly. It's even helpful for creative and persuasive writing as well, because by knowing how and why writers use certain words at a higher level, you're actually better able to then choose certain words yourself and improve your language in your own writing. So if you're excited to actually learn about how to analyse language for GCSE English, just like this video and I will show you exactly how this works. First thing to look at is the assessment objectives. These are how the examiners will actually mark your work when you are analysing language. Now, the important assessment objective here is AO2, to explain, comment on and analyse how writers use language, which is what we're talking about today, and structure, to achieve effect and influence readers, so the key is the effect on the reader, using relevant subject terminology to support their views. Now, what is subject terminology, you might ask? Well, it's just special words that relate to English. It could include complicated things, it could include a metaphor, a simile, iambic pentameter, a rhyming scheme, juxtaposition, but it can also include very simple things like a noun, a verb, or an adjective. That's also subject terminology. Remember, you won't always find these fancy techniques in every single text that you analyse. So, how do examiners mark this? Well, the examiner doesn't give a grade to an individual essay or piece of work. What the examiner does is they read your answer, and after each paragraph or so, they give you a level, which is not a grade, for each assessment objective, in this case AO2, and they would say, for example, well, paragraph 1, it's mostly level 3 for AO2, but paragraph 2 is not quite as good, it's mostly level 2. And at the end, they average it out, and you might get an average of, let's say, a low level 3 for AO2. Then they would decide on the mark based on that. They'd read a mark scheme that says, well, if it's a low level 3, they get, for example, 5 marks. Later, much later, you might get a grade assigned based on your entire paper and the other papers you've done as well. But very roughly, level 3 is a grade 5 or 6. Now, if we look at these descriptors, let's start at the bottom. Level 1, which no one should be aiming to do, is simple and limited. That's where you don't actually answer the question, you wrote something simple that might be vaguely related. Level 2 is some attempt, so you've partially answered the question. That's a grade 3 or 4 approximately. It's also not what you should aim to do. Level 3 is okay, that's clear and relevant. You see, it's quite a low standard to actually reach to get to a grade 5. Clear and relevant just means that you've answered the question, that it made sense. That's all it means, right? It's not much. It's nothing amazing. Level 4 is perceptive and detailed. This is where you get actually to a high level that you should be aiming for, grade 7 or above. Now, detailed is clear enough. Perceptive means that you think of things other students wouldn't. It means you think of imaginative or interesting or just different ideas that most people would not have thought of. So to be perceptive, here's a big tip that I've used to allow my students to be more perceptive, and write this down. To be perceptive, the best thing to do is to practice not writing about the first idea that comes to mind, because it's less likely to be unusual or interesting. Practice thinking of 3 or 4 ideas, and then analysing the 3rd or 4th one. Because that 3rd or 4th idea is so much more likely to be interesting, unusual, and therefore perceptive. Okay, so these are the criteria examiners are going to use. Now, when we're analysing language, we will be given extracts, a bit like this one. Let's take a look at this example. So the question says, look in detail at this extract from lines 9 to 15 of the source. This is actually question 2 from paper 1 for AQA, but remember you can use this skill, and you have to get into your head that English is about skills. You can use this skill in literature and other areas as well. Because if you can explain why writers use certain words, that's going to help your ability to analyse Shakespeare, or any other book that you study. Mr. Fisher remembered a time, surely not so long ago, when books were golden, when imagination soared, when the world was filled with stories which ran like gazelles and pounced like tigers and exploded like rockets, illuminating minds and hearts. He had seen it happen, had seen whole classes swept away in the fever. In those days, there were heroes, there were dragons and dinosaurs, there were space adventurers and soldiers of fortune and giant apes. In those days, thought Mr. Fisher, we dreamed in colour, though films were in black and white, and good always triumphed in the end. Well, this is a nostalgic piece of writing. It's written from Mr. Fisher's point of view. He imagines how exciting stories were, reminisces on how they were in the past, and regrets how they are now in the future. The question is asking us, how does the writer use language, remember language simply means words, to convey, which means show, Mr. Fisher's views on books and stories of the past. So you've got to relate it to the topic of books and stories of the past, which fortunately is the whole point of the extract. It's pretty much the only thing he talks about. Then they tell us that you could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. I don't recommend worrying too much about that. You're going to write only 2 paragraphs with this question. You only need to get 8 out of 8. You don't need to tick off all 3 of those things. They're only suggestions, and they said could, not should, or even must. Okay, so we have to explain how the writer used language to describe something specific within a certain set of lines. We've got to notice the devices like similes, metaphors, etc., and explain how they create an effect, and the key word is how. Now, to do that, to explain how, what you need to do is explain why they chose one word where they could have chosen others. So let's take, for example, films were in black and white. Now, Mr. Fisher means that films were boring. And he means that, well, he also means they were literally black and white, but we dreamed in colour. He's contrasting it with how our dreams were exciting. So when he says we dreamed in colour, he means that our dreams were exciting. He doesn't mean that literally they had colours, but films were black and white. He means that dreams were more exciting than films. So let's think about that. Why did he say dreamed in colour? Why didn't he just say our dreams were exciting? Or why didn't he just say amazing? Or spectacular, even? Why did he say dreamed in colour? There's a reason. There's always a reason. Once you think about the other words he could have used, you should be able to start to think and understand that reason. Now, in this case, if he had just said that our dreams were exciting, or fun, or amazing, it wouldn't have created such a nice contrast with films which were literally in black and white. So it allows him to make this juxtaposition between dreams and reality in the past. It also allows him to show his view of the past, that films were not exciting, that technology wasn't exciting, but people were. And that's the whole point. He thinks that now that we have all these films, and the internet now as well, and all these exciting things you can find and easily see, anything you can imagine, we're kind of boring as people. We're less exciting. This is his view, really, that he's nostalgic about this, and he wishes we went back to this simpler time when people were more interesting because they couldn't just find everything so easily and find these exciting images in films and TV and the internet. If he had just said our dreams were exciting, he wouldn't have been able to show this very specific attitude that he has. So that's the analysis you have to do, right? That's an example of what I talked about actually in the first video, of how you need to explain why a writer chose a certain word, and this skill is so crucial to the rest of English. Then we use the Peter structure: point, evidence, technique, explanation, and reader. We're going to write 2 paragraphs because it's 8 marks, and a rule you can use for many of these questions is 1 paragraph for every 4 marks. Then we're going to follow a step-by-step process to answer the question. So first of all, we're going to decide what impact the text has on you. So how do you feel or think? If you're not sure, then you've got to actually try harder to understand the text. Because although you might not find it interesting, you will have some reaction if you understand exactly what it's saying. It will make you think of something, even if you don't have an emotional reaction. So keep looking at it until you realise what it's making you think. Then choose the words or phrases, i.e. the language, that made you think or feel that. And then explain why those words or phrases made you feel that. And that's what I was just talking about, the how. The how is also the why. It's why do these words or phrases make you think or feel a certain way. So the key concept there is choice. The writer's choice of a certain word where they could have chosen something else is what you need to explain. So we have to be able to show, step 4, that we know the quotes that we've picked are part of an entire text and they're not just random words. And that is called context, being able to link them to the rest of the text. So, for example, if it said Mr. Fisher pushed it away, what is the it? Well, to know what the it is, you've got to know the context, what came before and what comes after that passage. And then, once you know that, you can work out what it is. And then you'll understand it better and you'll be able to analyse it better, of course. So we need to be very careful that we think about the wider context and don't just analyse individual words while ignoring what came before those words and what comes afterwards. Okay, so what we'll do is I'm going to show you an example of what this actually looks like. A few quick tips first from examiners. Now these are tips that I've taken from examiners' reports over many years, and we put them together so that actually you don't have to. So, first of all, the main mistake students make is they might not fully understand the focus of the question or the context of the quotes. They might not fully understand exactly the topic about Mr. Fisher's views, for example, and then they might get mixed up and say things that don't relate to Mr. Fisher's views about books and stories. Using terminology consistently. Now remember, you don't have to find complex language features. Simple ones like nouns and similes, verbs, extended sentences, certain types of sentence, they count as well. Remember, you don't get any marks for just knowing that something is a metaphor or whatever. You get marks for explaining why the writer used it. Choose your words carefully, so choose quotes that have lots of implied meanings. That means meanings that it makes you think of but doesn't actually say directly. So there are many interpretations and it makes it easier to analyse and think of ideas. And make sure you think about the choices, all the word choices, the exact words the writer chose, and all the evidence that you chose. So it's good to group together quotes, and then you can explain the effect of the individual quotes and the effect of all the quotes put together. That's called the collective impact, which makes your response much more specific. So ask yourself this question: could you have written the same thing about some other quote? And if you could, it's too vague. And that's a rule you can live by. And finally, try to vary the vocabulary in your answer. You don't get marks for vocabulary in this type of question, but if you write the same thing every single time, it will get boring and it will just look to the examiner like it's not good analysis. Remember, the examiner reads hundreds of these answers. They form their opinion of your work in the first minute or 30 seconds from reading your first paragraph. So be careful. Okay, so let's look at an example answer. Here is a bad answer of what not to do. So, in this passage, the writer has suggested that Mr. Fisher depends on books to help him when teaching. Okay, but that doesn't actually answer the question about his view of books from the past. Mr. Fisher seems to take great joy when he sees the boy's reaction to a plot or story, illuminating hearts and minds. Okay, but that again, it doesn't actually explain what he thought about the books. This description of the effect of books expresses why Mr. Fisher has such a positive impact on them. That doesn't really make sense. It's the books that have an impact on him. Illuminating suggests the stories are able to spark an interest. It has vast connotations of being eye-opening, suggesting the writer has used it for an impact. But what is the impact? Never say an impact. You always have to say what the impact is. And to furthermore convey Mr. Fisher's overwhelming positive emotions to books. Okay, so positive, but that's too vague. Positive in what way? Is he excited? Is he calm? Is he joyous? Like, what is the positive feeling? And what is the positive attitude? You need to be much more exact than this student has been. So here's an example of what to do. Harris uses a metaphor to clearly illustrate Fisher's passion for stories. More specific, because he said passion. Not just positive emotion, but passion. Stories are consistently said to be like animals, so that's good. They're linking many quotes consistently. Tigers, gazelles. This suggests that each story is unique and special in its own way. Good. You couldn't have said that about any other description. It's very specific. And this is why Fisher loves them. The simile, pounce like tigers, shows he is stimulated by the stories. Good. Stimulated is much better than just positive feeling. It's much more exact. It's like excitement and emotion that is bubbling up and making him think in a faster, more excited way. So it's much more exact. The verb pounce suggests aggression and commitment, reflecting Fisher's passion and commitment for them. However, the comparison, so this is what I said about words, right? This is explaining why they chose the word pounced and not jumped. It's less aggressive. Not leapt, which was also less aggressive and less committed. So it's being exact why they chose this word. However, the comparison to endangered animals, this is perceptive, not everyone would think of this, like tigers and gazelles, reflects Fisher's and ultimately the writer's overarching fear that stories are becoming endangered. Oh no. Yet Harrison says that they illuminate the minds and hearts, suggesting they will always remain integral and important to us. All right then. So we've at least got a clear reason about two aspects of the simile, both the violence and the power of the animals, and the fact they're endangered. So it's two opposite perspectives that fit together. And again, that's how the student's being perceptive. So hopefully from this you can see what we should be aiming to do when we are analysing language, and remember that you can use this method of explaining the effect of an individual word in literature and when you are doing evaluation as well. In the next video, I'm going to tell you all about literature and how to make sure you don't miss out on any marks in any literature questions that you don't need to, by knowing the right techniques and the right strategies for that kind of question. So I'll see you very soon, and if you want to actually get some more help in more depth, then I'm going to put a link underneath where you can find out more about the tuition program that I run and how it will help you personally. See you soon.